welcome to the lab at Canvas. I am Amy Chan, this is Ken Chan. We are the creators of the lab. And for us, we are very interested in where faith and culture meet. And we started noticing that a lot of people were having these faith and culture conversations outside of church, on podcasts and panel discussions and other places and coffee shops even, but not in church. And we said, uh-oh, my earring is scraping the mic. Let's see if I can fix that. Is that better? Yeah, so here we are, and the big thing behind it is that this is community learning, right? Everybody is a teacher, everybody is a student, everybody is a contributor, and we all come from different places. We all have different stories. And that's valuable, and we want to be able to learn from each other and share with each other. So for us, this is really community-driven discussions and learning. And that's why all of us are down here together, and nobody's up there, because we're all on equal footing here, and everybody has value in what you have to offer. So please, generously offer it up. If you're watching us online, if you're joining us via live stream, in order to participate in the discussion, you need to be watching through the YouTube app. The YouTube app. So click the button on the website that says YouTube link. It will take you directly to the live stream on YouTube. There's a chat box on the side, and you will be able to also participate even if you're not here in person.
Awesome. So we're really excited. We are going to be kicking off tonight. Hello? Hello? Oh my gosh. There we go. We're going to get all these kinks out of the way, and it will be smooth the rest of the night. So we are excited tonight to kick off a 4-part series on the topic, the image of God. Now, it's a 4-part series because there's a lot to cover, and of course, God is very big. But when I say kick off, to be fair, we actually started this back in the fall. We got together a great group of people that we lovingly call the Lab Rats. And we spent quite a bit of time with them researching and discussing and talking. And what we actually did was we recorded all that and we filmed all that. What we are going to do is we're going to essentially show you some of the discussions that the Lab Rats had and use that to really kind of prompt discussions that we'll have tonight with each other here and online as well.
Okay. What else?
So
anything else we need to tell them before we get started?
No, I mean, I think the main thing I want to do is I want to introduce our Lab Rats now.
Yes.
So we actually have the people who participated. So we have Michelle here, and we have James, and we have Madison. And Tan's doing double duty in the back. He's also doing tech as well. There he is. There's Tan's hand. Thank you, Tan. And then Amy has actually also participated as a Lab Rat. So,
and you'll also see Ken on screen because he was moderating everything.
That's right. And so I want us to kick off with the Lab Rats breaking the ice for us. We're going to watch about a 5-minute clip of us starting this all together. Welcome to the lab at Canvas. My name is Ken Chan. I will be your moderator for this evening. I am so excited that you are all here. We are embarking on something entirely new at Canvas Church. This project is about taking a topic and confronting what we think we know about it, and then really taking a look at how we can dismantle it and maybe find some things that we didn't know. And then finally, we're going to rebuild it, but we're going to rebuild it with love at the core of it. And tonight is when we begin our journey, and we're going to be exploring our personal as well as societal views on the topic of the image of God. And I'm really excited that all of you are here to tackle this topic. I want to spend some time to introduce our team of lab rats. So first we have Amy. She has a background in television production, and she's originally from Tennessee. James is joining us. He's an open source software developer, originally from Colorado. Madison works in IT at a public school system and hails from nearby Tustin. Tan joins us, and he works with the Orange County Social Services. He was born in Missouri, moved to Orange County. Michelle recently retired from teaching French and survey of Western and world art. Thank you so much for being here and exploring this. So we're going to get right into it. The very first question I want to ask, and I'm going to start with Michelle, is think back through most of your life. What is the one image of God that you've carried with you most of your life?
The one image of God that I've carried through most of my life is the image that Michelangelo created on the Sistine Chapel ceiling of God creating Adam and instilling life in him. And as I've gotten older, I think it's a really interesting image because it's really based on Greek mythology. It's like Zeus has come to the Judeo-Christian tradition, and that image has been really at the forefront of my mind whenever I think about God the Father.
So quick show of hands, does anybody else have that classic image as their image of God?
Yeah, I grew up with a very similar image. Maybe not the exact image, but definitely one that looked a lot like that image.
James, what image has been in your mind most of your life?
Oh my gosh, to be honest, I don't really have an image. It's more of like he was always a character in a story to me. I grew up in a church family, and so I remember all the Sunday school stories, and I remember the flannel boards. And everybody had a character on the flannel board except for God, right? There was no image. He was just the invisible actor, the character in the story. So I grew up with this very nebulous, fuzzy idea of God being a character in the story, but no real concrete image associated with that.
So for mine, kind of similar, like I couldn't, growing up, ever really picture what God looked like, because God was kind of, as James said, that character in the story. But for me, the one image that kind of has always stayed is those images of God being present in almost in nature, like through the burning bush or through the cloud during the exile from Egypt. Him being in nature, that made more sense to me.
Tan, do you have a different?
Kind of somewhat to the combination of those. The picture Bible that my mom bought me when I was a wee little lad, there was no picture. It was God. It was a box of text, and it was a italicized box of text that God spoke through. That's how you knew God was speaking, when it was a burning bush or the cloud, or if there was a shining light or something else.
There we go. Okay, before we kick off the discussion in here, first I want to say we've got Kirk here who will have the microphone, right? So anybody in the room, feel free to just throw up your hand or just start talking, and Kirk will make sure to get the microphone to you. Make sure, if you're watching the live stream, that you have clicked the YouTube link button on the web page and joined us via YouTube, because there is a chat, a place for you to chat, and we've got Tamara standing by to relay any of your comments and questions to us through the chat.
Yeah. And, you know, I think we wanted to kind of immerse you guys into a bit of the experience. But we envisioned the lab as, you know how you watch your favorite podcasts, right? And it's a very lean back experience. You know, what if you were able to, you know, talk with the people in the podcast? What if you were able to lean forward and have discussions? And that's really what this is about. So we're going to be doing this, you know, back and forth a little bit. I want to open us up based off of what we just saw. Show of hands. Did anybody growing up have that Michelangelo Sistine Chapel, Charleston Heston as Moses kind of image of God in their minds?
Can you flip up that slide for us real quick?
Well, I think we all know that image. So, show of hands, anybody here kind of grew up with that image? Quite a few, yes. And then did anybody remember growing up with images of like the burning bush or clouds or naturalistic things? Quite a few as well. More of a tornado cloud. A lot of energy type. And sorry, you were saying?
I was making a point.
Oh, Sharknado type of like really powerful. Yes, I see where that's coming from. Does anybody have something that wouldn't fall into those categories easily? Those are pretty much the big categories, huh? Do you guys have thoughts on why those images are so enduring? Why those images?
We've got a bit of a delay here, but
Yeah.
I've got a comment from online.
Okay.
So my image was a little more influenced by the Far Side kind of imagery, strong Gandalf-y God.
Yes.
But still very wise, very old, kind of.
Pretty sure he was still white.
He's still white. And bearded.
Yes.
The beard, it seems to be a big part of this.
Beard is important.
He also says it's changed over time.
Yes.
And we will get to that because, you know, where we're going to go next is, you know, those are images we grew up with. Maybe they're not images that, you know, stick with us, and we'll get to that. But the next part that you're going to see, I want you guys to be to rest assured that we never leave any stone unturned. We do all the research here. And by that, I mean we do a lot of Googling. So this next part is brought to you by Google search.
What I want to move into next for us to explore is a very enduring Western culture image. Essentially, if one were to Google God by itself, these are the images that you would see. All right. It's like looking in a mirror.
I just realized how uncultured I am because I think I've seen 2 of those
Michelle,
pictures.
what was your
Literally
bingo
none
card
of those
on that?
pictures I recognize.
Well, the thing that came to me was they either look like a pope or they look like Zeus. And there's very little in between, and that's probably quite intentional on the part of the artist.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Also, like, they match a lot of like the ways that I grew up in, like, kids' picture Bibles. That's how Noah and Moses looked. It was almost like they were all like the kind of big players in the Bible, in the Old Testament, were like copy paste of each other. I mean, they could be Abraham too, you know, it could be.
So I think I want to kind of explore why even back then, all the way till now, we have this enduring picture, right? And I'm going to call it out. It is an old white man. And so we can't legitimately have a lab about the image of God without talking about this. Does anybody have thoughts or theories of why that is so enduring?
Similar to what you said, that a lot of those pictures look like the Pope or the time, or of Zeus at the time. We're looking at these images, most I would imagine are mostly European. They make God in the image of themselves to perhaps be related. I would say so that way they could be relatable, so that way they could see and they could understand. If they made image of God as a black person, they'd be like, that might be weird or different, or like that's might not be relatable to them.
This image of God is very relatable for Western society, predominantly, white society, right? I think that God in this form portrays wisdom because we associate wisdom with old people. I think that God is a man because men were predominantly they held the power. You wouldn't paint God as a woman because women didn't have the rights that men had, and God has all the rights, so God is a man. He's white because white people walked around with power. So everything about this image to me reinstills a notion of who at the time, and even now, why the image has endured, is that when the image was created, it was an image of a person with power, and even today, this would be the image of a person we would associate with power.
I have to give Michelangelo some credit. He frames, if you put up the slide of the Sistine Chapel, it's an interesting concept because that pink thing, that swirl around which the heavenly host is located, that's actually the shape of a human brain that Michelangelo painted from an anatomical subject. They would look at cadavers.
Oh,
Now, to
I
me,
never knew that.
that is Michelangelo's way of saying this is how we conceive of God, as opposed to this is how God is looking. So I think it's Michelangelo's disclaimer, because he was extraordinarily pious, and he was not just your run-of-the-mill good Catholic. In fact, he went to bat with the Pope quite a lot. And the thing is that I really feel as if he's saying this is how we can frame God in our own minds, as opposed to this is my image of God.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
Interesting.
I really should have taken your class.
You should have, yes, absolutely.
So, even back then, I think he was searching for why this image is.
Well, he was a very great rebel, and he no, truly, he was. He went up against Pope Julius II, who was probably one of the most powerful people of his time.
I just think it's really interesting that you asked that question, because I just recently, like within the last month, watched a podcast with an interview from a theologian from Vanderbilt Divinity School, Jörg Rieger. And it was a fun podcast, but there was a question that was posed very early in the podcast that was just so interesting. He said, if you had a magic theological eraser and you could erase any theological idea from history, what would you choose? And his answer was, I would erase any image of God that was based on the idea of power coming down from on high and affecting change in the world. Because that image has done more damage to the Western world than any other theological concept. Because what it does is it reinforces the existing power structure that was already in place and gives it theological validity. And he said, it was really fascinating to listen to him talk about it. He said, when Jesus was alive, there was no problem distinguishing between Jesus and Caesar because they were radically different. By the time you start to get images of God, you can't really tell the difference because God is just another Caesar. He looks like Caesar, he acts like Caesar, he exerts his power the same way as Caesar. You would have never created that image in the first century of Christianity. It had to come later to support the power structure and the status quo that was already in place. And I thought, wow, that was really brilliant. And since I'm going to be doing this lab coming up, I'm going to remember that point. But
Well done.
it's interesting because when you put that with this, then you really do see how subversive Michelangelo is being here to say, this is not the way God is. This is the way we perceive God.
Ken, we've got a comment from online that sort of echoes that power discussion you were all
Yeah.
having. Lynn says the God she grew up with was a bit of a taskmaster, ready to get you when you screwed up.
Definitely.
Yes.
And can we follow up? Like, what form did that taskmaster look like? Was it like the Zeusian, God image? Because that would be one you would be afraid to cross, right?
Yeah, and I wonder from here, like, what did you all what relationship did you all have with that image, with this Michelangelo image of God? I mean, what feelings does that image conjure up?
I think that the image of, sorry, yes, thank you very much. I think that, just not on?
It's on.
Okay. Well, I think that image is that,
It's
what? It's not on.
Okay, there you
Now it's muted.
go. Muted. On.
Is that on? No.
10. Yeah, just leave it there.
Okay.
We could swap out. Maybe.
It's really not working. There, that's better.
there you go.
That's the Omni.
Okay, now I've forgotten what I was going to say. No, I remember what I was going to say, which is novel. The idea that Zeus is the prototype of Michelangelo's God is very much in concordance with the idea of the taskmaster. Because Zeus wasn't exactly the most loving and magnanimous sort of fellow. He did things that just pleased him, and he would zap you if you didn't do what he wanted you to do. And I think that we have a very big problem in our classically influenced society and culture that we have so much that we've absorbed out of the Greco-Roman tradition that we have a hard time conjuring up an idea of a loving God because we have these images of the pantheon of Greek gods and Roman gods being very arbitrary and self-serving. And it just does not mesh with the God of the Bible who loves his creation to the extent that he's willing to sacrifice himself for it. And I think it's really quite conflicted. And we have a very conflicted view.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, did anybody grow up feeling very warm and connected with this image of God? Not to that image?
I come from a pretty low SES area, so I'm completely uncultured, so I never seen that image of God growing up. You know, the God I was always familiar with was the beaten God, the God that's on the cross. So I can't, but so I've always, when I look, I don't think of that picture of God when I think of God.
Mhm.
When I think of, you know, I guess, the God who, a loving God more so than I guess, a God who's out to get me more so, right? But that's just me. I think God shows himself where you want him, where you want him to be. Recently, I went to another church service a while back, and they were singing a song, and on the background there was a slideshow of different images of Jesus Christ in different cultures, and like I was first time me seeing that, I'm like, wow, people are all over around the world had different views on at least Jesus, whether or not you see him as God or not. That's another question, but I think. I think Tian makes a good point where we see him as we want to be relatable to this person, and for me, I think I never saw myself relatable to a God that is super strong, right? So that's not I wouldn't be able to have that image of him, at least from my upbringing.
I agree with you. I grew up separating God the Father from Christ, and God the Father was the thundercloud, the burning bush. You are to bow down and fear him, and we are not up to his standard. And the approachable, loving face of God was Christ. And of course, I grew up in the United States, and so unfortunately my view of Christ was the one with blonde highlights and bleached teeth. So not necessarily a universal Christ, but that was the image of someone who loves you, who sacrifices for you. That's the one who's approachable. But you fear God the Father, and you approach him through Christ.
That's very interesting.
It is.
Yeah. One thing that was out of that section, James, I mean, your comment coming from the podcast that you watched, right? In the time of Jesus, this image of God would not have made sense, right? It's not at all related to Caesar. And then as we got that image, it became indistinguishable from Caesar. And I think that's fascinating because we can see what the outcome would be to put an image of God into a power structure like that. Did anybody have additional thoughts? Oh, Tamara.
Grandma Haley says what she's always appreciated about Michelangelo's image of God is that angels are surrounding him. He's not the one and only being, but even in this scene of creation, God is in and with a community, which is really lovely.
Oh, yeah. The
That's
heavenly
nice.
host going there.
Can I weigh in?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll represent the people who found it comforting.
Okay.
Yeah,
as a
great.
kid.
Good.
Because I grew up with that image, and I also grew up in big stone cathedral type. They're very Presbyterian, but they were big old neo-Gothic churches. And to my mind, as a kid, I think I internalized it as a child, that is what the adults who run the world look like. And so we should take comfort because people who know what they're doing are in charge of things. Now, once I came more to look old, and I realized everyone's faking it all the time. But at the time, it was the picture to me of here's who runs the world. And this one looks pretty nice. I mean, I was very touched always by the finger reaching out, which looked very gentle to me, even though he was very Zeus in physique. It wasn't a clenched fist. It wasn't. It seemed a very restrained and gentle power. And it never occurred to me that there could be other images of who runs the world. I mean, so, and it also was always old and it was beautiful. And that always felt very anchoring to me. That me, who was looking for stability in life, felt like here's this image of God painted in wet plaster, but to a kid, painted in stone at the Vatican, and it's been around forever. And these are the people who are carrying on some distant but very important knowledge, and I can look at that and feel very rooted in the world, which was a very narrow world in which that's what power looked like. It also always looked like that guy could smite you at any point. I mean, he's being very nice now, but he clearly has the goods to do you harm. So mind your P's and Q's. And it wasn't until much later, into my probably teens or 20s, that it began to occur to me that was a very ethnocentric picture created by humans who happened to build big buildings, not by God, who had established this giant temple to himself and told us this is what we should paint on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the common threads that we're seeing in our conversation is there is this very persistent image of God, the Zeusian one, and there's an attachment to power, right? And that attachment to power becomes something that becomes a little prickly to relate to, right? It's not a type of power that you really want to hug, if you will, right? And that's, I think, something that we will continue to explore, and actually in a different week we'll also explore Jesus as a topic as well.
Thank you. What was everybody's impression of the stories of the Exodus and Moses and the whole line where the children and Moses were exhorted not to look at God's face, that looking at God's face could be fatal? And that was more the image I grew up with. It was hard to personify because it was a fearful image. You needed to look at him through the cloud.
Well, you didn't even need to look at his face. You just needed to touch the wooden box in which the stone tablets were being carried. And even if you were trying to save it from falling over and spilling, that would still strike you dead right there on the spot. So, I mean, that's not real huggy.
Don't you want a God that can do that? I mean, I think that we forget that we're putting God in a box and we're trying to keep him understandable by us. And I want to be worshiping a being that's greater than anything I can probably imagine. I'm having issues with this thing.
The mics don't like you, Michelle.
A lot of people don't like me. What?
You gotta put
There
it
you
close.
go.
I just think that we lose perspective in our very comfortable world of the greatness of God, and if we don't have a God that has so many different aspects to it, him, her, it, we lose the incredible scope of God. God's scope is so much greater than ours, and we don't talk about that.
Oh, go, Tamara.
Go, Tamara, because we're like a minute behind them. I'm sorry. But Mark says he doesn't want a God like that.
Like what?
So I'm assuming it's the mean, vengeful, angry kind of God?
Right.
Or super
Yeah.
powerful?
Follow up, Mark, if you've got more to say on that.
Yeah.
I had shared this with the lab rats when we were doing this discussion that that my initial relationship with this God, and 10, I don't know if you can throw it up real quick again, just to, but this Michelangelo Renaissance God, when I was younger, I had a very affectionate view of that God as well. And mostly because that was an image that I could relate to, and I have a very loving father. So to make that translation from my father to God the Father was not difficult for me, right? But then I grew up and I started living in the world, and I started getting outside of my community and outside of my family, and I started interacting with the world in a different way, and that image took on a whole new meaning. And one of the reasons why it took on a whole new meaning was because it meant something very different to the rest of the world, and that impacted me. So I don't know about you all. I don't know if you all had that experience where that image changed, but now I have a very
Different relationship
very,
with that image.
very different relationship with that image. I have a very, what is the word when?
There's tension there.
There is tension.
Yeah.
There is great tension there.
Let's say there's tension there.
So I don't know, like, if that's just a common thing, but you were talking, Michelle, so I'm curious about this too. You were talking about how, well, you want a God that can have the power to smite people. I don't know if I want that God.
I don't want the power to smite. I want him to be powerful, and I want him to be greater than anything I can imagine. And I think it's really important that we realize that we can't put labels or boundaries on the being that created us, because that would be, to me, blasphemous almost. And I think that we are trying to, in our own minds, present ourselves with an image that we can accept, and with an image we can kind of digest. And I think that's something that's not intended and not correct about the being that we worship. I will say one more thing, and I will be quiet. One of the things that I just realized, and it's kind of obvious, is that in Michelangelo's image, everybody's nude except for God. And I think that's very interesting, because it's just like God is hidden in some ways from us. And the fact that we can't know God is perhaps depicted in that way in that particular image. And I think that's kind of goes along with what I was saying. All right.
So Tamara.
Tamara, and then Suzanne.
So Mark has confirmed that he's along the lines that Amy was saying, where he didn't want a God who would smite you at any time. So that was what he was responding to. And then from Yoram, we have Jews and Muslims, in a way, solve the problem of the whole image of God theme by forbidding the people to make graven images.
Yes.
And Lynn says it gives each of us the opportunity to see God as we see fit in a way that we can relate to. So thank you, Yoram and Lynn.
And we are actually going to be talking about that next week. So I'll let you be the last word on this before we go. No? Okay.
All right, then I have something to say.
Oh,
All
Tan.
right.
I got the mic to
And you got a mic to work.
It
Tan
only
is
took
talking.
replacing the batteries. And so I'm going to back Michelle up. I do want a powerful God. I do want a God that can smite. I do want a God that could erase the universe. I want a God that can create the universe. The God that has that potential. My God, I don't want a God that would be limited to say, man, I really wish I could do something about this. Man, But alas, my limits, my power, it does not go that far. I cannot protect myself or anything in kind of that level. But of course, I mean, with the amazing thing of all of that is the God with that potential, the God that could erase the universe, the God that could create the universe, chooses to instill and love and protect and guide and dwell with us.
Yeah, I think what I want to do is I want to roll on the next section, because what we did was we furthered our discussion and said, okay, that's what you were growing up with. Then the lab rats started talking about, well, what about now? How are you connecting and having a relationship with God right now? So let's roll it.
I want to try a bit of an exercise. I would love for you guys to hold in your mind the image of God, whatever it may be, and start to think about what emotions that provokes for you and your personal image of God. I'll take a little pause for us to think about that. I'll start with Madison.
I think for me, like especially when I think of like that image of like God as, you know, the cloud that the Israelites followed out of Egypt, like it's like guidance and comfort, like that comfort of someone bigger than me is watching out for the road ahead, and also like the guidance of going, okay, I'm gonna follow the cloud where it goes, and when it stops, I'm gonna stop. So it's kind of like following that path and having that guide for it.
It's comfortable to know that there is a being in whom all creation is for. Wait a minute, I'm having preposition issues. For whom all creation is just a known entity and a known commodity, and in whom we can trust to make things right. And that is a great comfort. But it's also very awe-inspiring to know that every little detail of every atom, every subatomic particle, and the vastness of the universe are in the palm of his hand. And he's bigger than any of that and smaller than any of that. So again, my mind cannot conceive of this magnitude. And that in itself is comforting, because somebody's bigger than I am and better than I am and able to deal with what all is going on in this world that's completely out of my control and it's crazy.
So what's interesting is that when I stopped now to think about what image of God comes to my mind, it's not the image that I grew up with. It's not the Sistine Chapel image. It's literally just light. Radiant light. And I get this sense of warmth, this sense of awe, feeling enveloped in just brightness or love, really. The image that I grew up with, the image of our God from the Sistine Chapel, I think that was a very comforting image when I was a child. I grew up with a very loving father in my own life, and so the idea of God the Father was a very comforting image for me. But then that image changed as I grew, especially as a woman in our society, right? It impacted me differently. I started having not necessarily the best feelings toward that figure. And so that's when my image of God had to change.
When we did that pause, for me, it was like taking a walk on the beach when the fog's rolling in, right? Just that overwhelming sense of presence that you can't escape it. No matter where you go, you can't see very far. You can't outrun it. You can't outwalk it. It's just surrounds you and envelopes you. Envelope is a great word. Embraces you. So there's a very calming sense I get when I picture that. I like it.
Tam.
The emotions that I connect with my image of God, I think very much align, that initial thought very much aligned with awe, power. Again, my images mostly and still come from that picture book Bible where he's in the burning bush. But then at the same time, I then recalled when, I think it was Moses, that went up onto the mountain, and then there was a fierce storm, but God wasn't in the storm. There was an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. There were all these images of power, and then it was in the stillness that followed, that quietness that followed, and that's when God, the voice of God, spoke. I think that it's a combination of holding both that image of power, but then I'm still trying to reconcile how do we get that closeness of the image of intimacy and closeness. I think that's part of the reason why that's also in there, that God is in that quiet and it waits for everything else to go out, so that way there is only you and God in that moment.
So let's explore that a little, because I think what you said is very interesting. On one side you have we have this concept of power, of unknowability. I don't know if you know if that's a word, but and yet on the other side we have this intimacy, right? This fog, this light that surrounds us, right? Is that challenging to have a relationship with that image of God, those ideas that you guys are talking about?
That in creation, God intended to have relationship with man and woman. And we had, at that time, humanity had intimacy with God and closeness to God because that was the original plan for creation. And we bungled it by wanting to know the mind of God, the tree of knowledge. And the idea that we chose our own way, the presumption of separating ourselves with God, is a human foible and not the intent of God, because he intended for us to live happily and well in a paradise that he created for us. And all of humanity has been trying to get back to that state in whatever way they can, and there's really only one way to do it, and that's through the Messiah, Jesus.
James, you have...
Well, I probably have the complete opposite experience of everybody here.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
So my own personal journey has led me to a point where I don't feel that separation at all, right? As I started to unravel that feeling of disconnect from my images of God and how broken they were, and through some studies for the Ten Commandments and different things, I ended up discovering that a lot of the stories that I had learned that created my images of God as this character in a story are very tradition stories. And they have layers and layers and layers and layers of tradition that had been layered onto them. And the version that I had was just the latest in that traditioning process. So, of course, it made sense to me. It's all I knew. But when you start peeling back the layers of the onion and you get back beyond those layers. So I stumbled across a book, and I don't want to get too far ahead of our conversation, but I stumbled across a book about the image of God. It's called The Liberating Image. And when I finally started to approach Genesis 1 through 11 from this different narrative, it changed everything for me. It literally changed everything about how I read the text, about how I understand the image of God. So I would say that when we look at those texts, there is no separation from God, right? And I think you're right, we have been trying to create monuments to try and get back to God. But the first 11 chapters of Genesis tell us we don't have to do that because God is always with us. We never have to climb the mountain because God always comes down to us. He comes down to us in the garden. He comes down to us after the garden. He comes down to us when Noah's there. He comes down to us at the Tower of Babel. He comes down. Our God is a God who comes down to meet with us so that we don't have to try to go to this unattainable place to meet with him. And when you start reading the text that way, it changes everything. You start to see stuff in the stories that you didn't notice before, where God just shows up. Where when I used to read him, I'm like, where's God in this story? And then you realize, oh, he's right there. It's just fascinating to me. So that's kind of how my journey went.
Isn't there a line, nothing can separate us from the love of God?
Absolutely.
Madison, you're nodding like a bobblehead.
You sure you want me to go?
Yeah.
I want to hear where
Okay.
you want to go.
So what I keep thinking is like in the past, kind of like when Michelangelo was doing these paintings, in that point in the past, it was still like the people didn't necessarily read the scripture. They were told kind of what to believe. And in a way, in our modern society, yes, we have the scripture, we have the ability to read it, plus read all sorts of other books and blogs and podcasts about it. But at the same time, in a lot of the broader church body, we're still being told by the pastor, this is what to believe. This is how you're going to pray. This is what God looks like. This is what God stands for. And so I think that's kind of also an interesting dichotomy in this, like our modern life of we're way kind of from those old, we have more access, but we're still in that same power structure of being kind of fed what we should be doing. And like, it's kind of hard to get out of, generations of saying, the Lord's Prayer, of saying, Our Father who art in heaven. I one day did Our Creator, and I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. But then it was also like, ooh, I feel like I'm breaking a rule and God's going to smite me. Like, it was, it's like that very, and then it was like, well, wait, but why am I feeling like I'm in trouble for altering, possibly like one word that still encompasses who God is.
James, what you said about, this very enduring image is about power, representation of power, right? And societally, we can understand what the dangers of that is, right? But at the same time, earlier in the evening, we talked about power as well. And so it's very interesting because thematically in our conversation, we accept that God is very powerful, but we get nervous when that is represented in earthly human power, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically white man power.
Right.
There is something beautiful about God the Father that Jesus talks to us about, that Jesus teaches us. That God the Father is a God the Father that I want to have a relationship with. But that is not the God the Father that I encounter in a broader sense in society on a regular basis. The God the Father that I encounter in a broader sense is judgmental, is what is the word?
Patriarchal.
Patriarchal, is putting me, particularly as a woman, in my place constantly. And that is a difficult space, that is a difficult God to want to have a relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that image stems from these pictures that we look at. Whether Michelangelo meant to pass down this image of power, of a powerful God, white male God that was going to perpetuate patriarchy and white supremacy in our world, doesn't really matter now, because it did help do that, whatever his intent. And all of these images that we just watched on this, screen, like, those have all helped continually build up that power structure that we then, as a society and as individuals, have to deal with. There is fallout for that.
Absolutely. One of the things you said earlier, which I really liked, was you were saying, traditions are part of traditions, and we're kind of talking about that right
Absolutely.
now, right?
Yes.
Because to even suggest maybe we don't use the word father in church, maybe we get a little looser with the pronouns, is a scary thought. It's a very, for some people,
yes,
is a very scary thought. Maybe we have distanced ourselves a little bit away from the Michelangelo image.
Not enough, though.
But it remains.
Mm-hmm.
It remains in different aspects of things. I don't want to call out anything, but there are congregations that have rules that say God must be addressed a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Must be addressed as Father. Must be He. Must, right? And yet at the same time, I saw the realness and the emotion as you guys described your image of God and your relationship with God. And what we're going to do is, in our next couple of sessions, is unpack that. Unpack what alternatives do we have? Do we have any alternatives to reimagine and relook at this, and maybe untangle, unwind, and see if we apply love, if we apply a little bit of patience and empathy and understanding, where could we possibly get?
I think kind of building off of kind of everyone's answers, and also thinking back to something Michelle said earlier about the coulds, the shoulds, the musts. Like, it's that the absoluteness, like the thinking of in solid black and white absolutes, because not many things, I shouldn't say nothing, not many things in our world experiences are purely black and white, that easy. And even and so I think sometimes having those, like, that absolute, and like hammering on that absolute of you must, you could, you should, this is what you must do, this is what you must believe, this is how you must see God, and if you don't, then you're wrong. I think that's one of the things that I would like to see deconstructed in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for a wonderful first evening discussing our topic.
I have a bad battery.
Oh, but we can hear you.
There was a lot in that last section, and we're running short on time, so we're not going to be able to unpack all of it. But I would like to throw this out. Ken talked about getting loosey-goosey with the pronouns.
Looser with
Sorry.
the pronouns.
Looser with the pronouns. Sorry. Madison talked about saying our Creator instead of our Father. playing around with some of the expressions that we use for God. And I'm just curious, how many of you in your personal lives will play around with the way that you talk to God, or the idea of either the pronouns or the descriptors that you'll choose for God? And tell us online too. Show of hands. Anybody play around with the pronouns at home? Yeah, I do. Is anybody, sorry. Does anybody feel like we should not be playing around with those pronouns?
No, I think the consistent. Hello?
Yes.
I think the consistent image is back to Corinthians and Paul, we see through the glass darkly. And I think that gives me a little bit of grace to say, I don't understand, and this is my best approach to this, but a loving, powerful Father will forgive me as long as I engage in the discussion.
So,
I think it's within our permission also, even in relation to how even the biblical times have practiced it. As shocking as it sounds, I feel like it could be completely wrong, but I think in the Old Testament they call God El Shaddai, which has a very, I think from what my understanding, is very motherly, and it's similar to like, I don't know, I can't say because I'm not pastor, but you know, but I think if our predecessors, they had that, if they had that same inclination, I think we are also given that same permission to experiment with what it means to what God looks like. And I haven't done it so myself. It's because I think it's just too ingrained in me saying, "Oh, my Father in heaven." No, I have always had the inclination to say, "Oh, my motherly Father" sometimes, but that's just that's just something in the back of my head that can't come out yet.
can I ask you? Like, sure. You said that sometimes you will.
Well, I go to my Savior because, and I come from the view that I look at how God is described, and I also remember who were interpreting what God and telling us who God should look like. And they were old Jewish men. There were books of the Bible that were intentionally left out because they were written by women. So I like to go to my Savior, or sometimes just I don't address. I just go right into, thank you, and I am grateful, but I don't address because sometimes there are no words to address.
Thank you for sharing that. Tamara, you look like...
I have a caller, yes.
Yeah.
Liz says, the idea of God as mother, even as they, them, definitely resonates with me, feeding us, nurturing, and mothering us. I can relate so well to a female aspect of God. So she's really feeling the duality of God there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we want to explore with this lab and this topic, and what we discovered very quickly, is every single one of us has a very personal image of God, a very personal relationship with God. And yet, what persists of course, we've all talked about, right, is the Zeusian, but also our own private relationship, image, pronouns are just that. They seem to be very private. We don't seem to share that with each other. We certainly don't see a lot of representation of that on a stage or in a structure publicly like that. And so one of the interesting things that I think at the end of this journey is really hopefully being able to unpack that and really talk about how does our personal relationship, our personal view, image of God become something that we can share a little bit more and that we can all collectively potentially learn from each other on.
And unfortunately, we're already over time. So
Very quickly.
we're going to have to say goodnight. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for those of you that are here. Thank you for those of you that joined us on the live stream, for all the sharing. Just to let you know that next time we come back, we're going to be talking about some things that our lab rats went out and did a bunch of research and then came back and shared that research. And you can find some of that on our resource list online. So if you have time, take a look at that resource list. It's a great jumping off point for some of the things we'll be discussing next week.
You'll learn words like aniconism.
Aniconism, yes.
Which, if you don't know what that is right now, you can look it up, and hopefully you have an easier job pronouncing it than I did.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you to Tan and Steve for running our tech. Thank you to Tamra, who was monitoring our chat. Thank you to Debbie, who nothing at this church happens without her help and support. Grandma Debbie.
Yes.
Congratulations, Grandma Debbie.
Yep.
And then...
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to catch up on anything, it's all online. And really, I want to say that, you know, for the people online as well as everybody here, if you kind of get where we're going and if you've enjoyed it, we would love for you, obviously, to come back, but also to bring a friend. We just think this is going to be more valuable the more voices, the more people we have with us. We've got 3 more sessions out of this, and it is going to be jam-packed. And I think you guys are going to delight in some of the things that the lab rats got into and talked about, but also, hopefully, things that we here will get into and talk about as well.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Yes, thank you.